lot of bits here. Both, okay. Oh. Sorry, do you want to talk afterwards? Or I think, yeah, I think we'll have time afterwards, it's fine. When I press play. Yep. Can we have the first slide? Excellent. Good morning, everyone. Good morning, buongiorno, and thank you very much for leaving behind the bright Perugia sunshine to come and join me for the much darker topic of deepfake video. I appreciate your attendance. I'm Hazel Baker, and I'm head of UGC newsgathering at Reuters news agency based in London. UGC, if you're not familiar with the term, stands for user-generated content, and my definition of that is anything not filmed by a professional camera. Now, most of the video that Reuters provides to its many clients is filmed by a professional camera, but increasingly we know that images and video captured by members of the public and other witnesses to news events is a crucial part of storytelling. So that means I lead a team of producers globally who are dedicated to finding, verifying, and clearing this material from the scene of major news events. Authenticating this content is a major challenge of the job, and I'm always thinking about how people may try to mislead us, both deliberately and otherwise. In the second half of this presentation, which I think will take about 35 minutes, so there'll be plenty of time for questions, I'll show some examples. And I'll also tell you about how we've been thinking about how deepfake video or synthetic video may impact our work. And we'll show you some considerations about what we might do to mitigate this. With that in mind, I'm going to run through an experiment that we did recently in our newsroom, and I'll talk about the rationale behind it. Please feel free to ask any questions as they arise, but if not, there'll be loads of time at the end for questions. And also, if you're really interested in this topic, make sure you stay in this room for the session afterwards, which is directly complimentary. It's run by Sam Gregory, and I highly recommend you stay on. Okay, let's start with by asking, what is a deep fake? You have probably only heard this term in the last 2 years or so. Some research by the cybersecurity company DeepTrace found that prior to 2017, there were only about 100 Google searches globally for the term. But that number exploded in 2017 and into 2018 as the phenomenon was picked up by mainstream media and people began to consider this kind of phenomenon. The word itself, deepfake, is a portmanteau or blend word from deep learning and fake. And that's important to know because it makes the distinction that this fake or synthetic material is underpinned by deep learning or artificial intelligence, AI. This AI is what drives the computer program to create new, realistic imagery. These kind of videos first emerged in the world of porn and on the fringes of 4chan, where famous people's bodies were superimposed onto the bodies of actors in face swapping. But they received much wider attention in the news industry in 2017, when University of Washington researchers successfully generated a highly realistic video of Barack Obama talking about terrorism, fatherhood, and other topics. All of the audio clips they used were real, but the video itself showed Obama in a completely different setting. The audio track was seamlessly blended together from snippets from multiple different clips to create a brand new synthetic speech. The effect was really uncanny. It looked like an Obama interview, but in fact, his words were taken completely out of context. The speech shown in this video simply never happened.
Michelle and I tried to teach our kids. You talked about what we talk about over the dinner table. A lot of what we talk about over the dinner table is, we live in a diverse world. And
I'm honored, and I think people can say that my election symbolizes some progress, at least within the small confines of the legal community. I think it's real important to keep the focus on the broader world out there and see that for a lot of kids, the doors that have been open to me aren't open to them.
And if that wasn't scary enough, last year another research team, this time from the Max Planck Institute, Technicolor, and the universities of Stanford, Munich, and Bath took it one step further. Using a technique they call deep video portraits, they showed a system where an actor can have their facial expressions transferred to the video of, say, Barack Obama or Vladimir Putin. Facial expressions, head movements, and eye gaze and the blinking could all be controlled by the movements of the source actor, like a puppet. The power of this is pretty stunning. These technologies potentially make it possible to recreate highly convincing videos showing real people, whether public figures or not, saying pretty much anything you want in any kind of setting. The results aren't perfect, and I'll show you our result in the coming slides, but it's a small leap of imagination to think about how these techniques could be used, whether intentionally or accidentally, to manipulate. So that's the background as to how I became worried about deepfakes and how I started to think in depth about this issue. It's now estimated that there are actually around 10,000 deepfake videos online. Again, that's a figure found by researchers at DeepTrace, the cybersecurity startup. However, the vast majority of these are actually on online adult-only entertainment websites. They basically feature celebrity faces superimposed onto the bodies of porn actors. And we've not yet had an explosive news story involving this type of material. So are deepfakes really a serious threat for our industry? I'm going to look at a couple of views on this and give you my thoughts. Deepfake propaganda is not a real problem. We spent the last year wringing our hands about a crisis that doesn't exist. That was published just last month. It's from an article written by the journalist Russell Brandon, and it was published on The Verge. I thought that was a really interesting quote. Contrast that with this from a research paper also published last month by the European Science Media Hub. Journalists and media need to have robust processes in place for identifying deepfake video footage in order to ensure high-quality news reporting. If you haven't read this report, it's very in-depth. It looks at lots of different ways of misinformation and its spread and what we might do to counter that. So who's right there? There seems to be a real disconnect of views. Well, I'm going to sit on the fence and say both are. It's true that, to the best of our knowledge, we haven't seen a piece of synthetic video that's caused a genuine threat to news reporting. But certainly from my perspective and the work that I do, I don't want to wait till we reach that point to consider how we might spot something if something of that nature were to emerge. We need to think about the processes we have now and how they can adapt to help spot this kind of video. Moreover, and this is actually really important, I think, the concept of deepfakes among the public at large has now risen to an extent that people are beginning to question whether real, authentic material could actually be a deepfake. So these are a couple of tweets that I found last week, and if you search for deepfake on Twitter, you'll see lots of comments which are actually similar to this. So the video on the left, I don't know if you remember, you saw the video of the Pope pulling his ring away from worshippers in Loreto. Well, this video actually published by ABC News is not that video. It's a subsequent one where the Pope did allow people to kiss his ring. Now, the Vatican explained the initial video. He said the Pope had been worried about contagion. And we have no doubt that was an authentic piece of video. But there's a tweet under there. I just redacted the name because I don't think we need to know the individual user. But that person stated, very likely this is a deep fake. Okay, so that's not actually an isolated example. We do see lots of people question video. And on the right-hand side, that's a British newscaster reporting last week on a Leave rally, obviously related to Brexit, in which he remarked that he'd never seen so many white people. It was a comment that caused a bit of a row in the UK. And again, people couldn't quite believe that had come out the words, that those words had come out the mouth of Jon Snow. And someone wrote underneath, LOL, oh my, did he really say that? Or is it a deep fake? So people really are questioning. They've heard this phrase and they know the possibilities are serious, so they're actually starting to question whether authentic material could in fact be a deepfake. I think if our audiences are considering that newsworthy video might be synthetic, then we need to be in a position to robustly defend authentic content. And I want to know everything we can possibly know about these techniques to make sure that we're prepared for when we do encounter a piece of synthetic video. From my experience training journalists in verification, I know that the best way to really learn is to examine real-life cases. They're really memorable, they're really tangible, and people sometimes are amazed at what has genuinely happened in news reporting. But in the world of deepfakes, there were very few news-appropriate examples to study. The ones involving newsworthy figures, like the Obama ones I just showed you, were really widely known. So that gave us an idea. what if we created our own deepfake to test how our teams could react? Now, this is something we did give great deal of thought to. Reuters obviously has based its entire reputation on trustworthiness and absolutely accurate news, not deepfakes. So we had to consider very carefully about what kind of scenario we could use to create a deepfake. We did not want to put anything in the news ecosystem that could be taken out of context or cause any sort of damage whatsoever. So I joined forces with our head of video products at Reuters, Nick Cohen, and we got our heads together and had a good think about what we could do here to make a video that could help our teams learn and that could teach us a bit about deepfake creation. The guiding principle for the experiment was know your enemy. We wanted to learn two things. One, what it takes to make a deepfake, and two, whether we could spot one. Actually, the very first challenge was to come up with a plausible scenario. So previous deepfakes have involved high-profile speakers such as Barack Obama. But I know from my experience as a TV broadcast journalist that every time Obama or another public figure speaks, there's usually more than one camera in the room, and there's certainly an aide or other witnesses. For me, the real threat comes when there's only one camera in the room and potentially no witnesses, which gave me an idea. One type of video we often encounter in our work is business interviews that have been filmed, as we call them, down the line. That means done via a remote studio. So your interviewee is sitting in a studio with nobody else and basically a robotically controlled camera. It's actually quite a common setup. The questions are asked by a reporter who's back at base, maybe back at a studio in the HQ. I thought, what could happen if that video recording of somebody giving an interview answer was somehow hijacked and manipulated? How would we prove that it wasn't authentic? As I said, one thing we were really clear about was that we didn't want to spread any video that could be damaging if it was shared without context, and we also needed to create a fully hypothetical situation. Moreover, we really needed to gain full consent from our participants. It's now a big issue that people, particularly celebrities, have found themselves the subject of deepfakes, highly defamatory deepfakes, to which they gave zero consent. So we made sure that anything that we did was done with full consent of the participants and knowledge as to how it may be used. This video that we created, which we released just a few weeks ago, has now been shared a lot. So it was very important that we told the participants ahead of time that they could find themselves online and discussed it at depth. So with that in mind and the hypothetical situation in mind, please take a look at this video, which I'm about to play. It's a fictional chief executive of an imaginary consumer electronics firm. She's answering an interview question in French, I've put English subtitles, about her company's upcoming expansion.
Et aujourd'hui, je suis heureuse de vous annoncer que nous allons investir 1,2 milliard d'euros supplémentaires. Cela va nous permettre d'augmenter de plus d'un tiers les capacités de production de notre site de la vallée de Kokoma. Cela va créer 1000 emplois dans la région. Cela signifie également que nous pouvons commencer dès maintenant à produire notre dernière gamme de smartwatches. Je pourrais vous en révéler davantage à ce sujet au prochain trimestre.
Now, what's interesting here is that the woman speaking in that video is not French. In fact, she doesn't speak French at all. She's our colleague. She works upstairs on the 5th floor, and this is how she normally sounds.
As you know, we opened our second production site earlier this year, and today I'm delighted to announce that we will be investing $1.2 billion to boost capacity at our Kokoma Valley base by over a third. This is an exciting time for us, and it's going to bring 1,000 jobs to the area. It'll also mean that we can bring forward production of our latest line of smartwatches, and I'll be able to reveal more about that in the next quarter.
Now here the scripts matched, the French, the English, the same, but it doesn't take a leap of imagination to see how just a few details being changed here or there, a couple of billions extra on an investment figure could really change the narrative of the story. So let me tell you about how we created this. The woman, as I said in the video, is our colleague Tess. First we filmed Tess reading the interview script in English and saying a range of sentences that involved her making different shapes with her mouth and her lips and her tongue. Next, we asked our French colleague Evangeline to come into the same TV studio. She repeated the interview answer in her native French. And then we enlisted the help of a specialist company called Synthesia. They're a London-based startup using AI for a range of good, well, they would say good commercial applications. They're looking at how this technology could be used in film, in advertising, and lots of other things that people might want to do involving translation. Using our video, they mapped Tess's face. And then they used generative AI to learn and recreate her facial dynamics. So you can see in the picture there, she's wearing a green mask. That's a face mask that they created of Tess, bespoke to her and her facial shape. Then they did the same for Evangeline. They tracked the facial movements she made in her French speech. And they regenerated the whole of the lower portion of Tess's face to match these. This is called native dubbing, and it's really incredible to see. And what's really surprising about this is we took quite a while filming this, maybe a whole day in our TV studio in London. We gave all the data to Synthesia, or the video clips, and within an afternoon they'd produced this deep fake video, well, a reanimated video, as they call it. And that was quite a surprise. We were expecting maybe a few days worth of production. Creating the clip was a real education for us. We learned a lot about the process. If you ask me to make another deepfake video, I'm going to do a better job than that. And I really did learn about what you need to make this thing authentic and chilling. And we also learned about the reaction from people when they saw it, not just the people who didn't know it was coming, but also those involved in the video. So with this piece of video in-house, we were ready to do some testing. And I really want to be clear, I wasn't trying to trick or embarrass my colleagues in any way. I just wanted to know, could our verification workflow stand up to a piece of video like this? Now, normally verification is an all-encompassing process. We'd never look at a piece of video in isolation. We look at how it's arrived to us, the source, the mode of transmission, and we look for corroborating material, and we look in depth into what we know about the subject and who else might have witnessed the event. Now, this wasn't really possible here because I didn't want to plant this in some sort of Reddit forum and build like some kind of crazy scenario around it, because that just wouldn't have been ethical. So instead, I just gave it to my colleagues. In fact, I sent the best portion of it via WhatsApp to my colleagues and my team. And I said, it's just a video interview. I don't want to put this on the wire, but can you spot anything unusual? And this is what was the interesting part. What did we learn? And how did the colleagues react? I think this modest experiment gave us two things. First of all, we learned to identify some red flags, which can be giveaways to tell us that the video has been manipulated. And we also learned a bit about human instinct. So let's start with the red flags. The first one was the audio to video synchronization. Perhaps you noticed it yourself when you watched. Now, our picture supervisor in London, Pete, has got over 30 years experience dealing with broadcast news footage. And he is no stranger to badly syncing audio. In fact, it's one of his regular challenges, particularly when he's dealing with material that's been compressed badly or been filmed on old kit. So he was kind of not surprised, but the thing that he noticed about this clip was the audio tends to sync in and out of the video. Now, he's used to what's called creeping sync, but that's when the sync either starts out of, the speech either starts out of sync with the video and creeps into sync, or vice versa. But this was in and out. And I asked him how often he'd seen something of this nature, and he said perhaps once every 10 years. It was really rare, so he definitely picked on that straight away. The second thing we observed was problems around the mouth shape and certain words. Again, you might have noticed this, but I think if you speak French to a native standard, you really will have homed in on this. As one of my French colleagues put it, some of it is spot on perfect. It's the sibilant sounds that are dodgy. By that we mean s and sh. It kind of looks like she's lisping in something like vous annoncez, but she's not. The S sound is clear. And I think that was a really interesting take-home point for us. If you can have a native speaker watch something like this, they are just far more instinctively attuned to how the mouth shape should look for certain sounds, and things just don't feel right. So that was a really important take-home point for us. Make sure we get a native speaker to view material whenever possible. The third thing that someone noticed, which I was really pleased about, was that the subject test was oddly robotic. They asked, why is her head so still? And I could answer that. It's because Synthesia, the company who made this for us, said, if you can get your subject to sit still, don't use any facial expressions, and sit against a plain backdrop as she was, you'll get better results. That gives the computer systems fewer variables to work with, so you get a better outcome. But people aren't robots, and it actually took several takes for Tess to be able to speak with her head really still. In fact, she was bobbing around naturally. And for Evangeline, the French speaker, I tell you, she was even more expressive with her head. So it was very unnatural. So I was really pleased that our teams noticed that degree of unnaturality about the video. It was very strange that her head was so still. Another French-speaking colleague noticed that the blink pattern that Tess showed seemed unnatural. We didn't modify the blinks at all, so it's hard to really draw any firm conclusions, but certainly from my perspective, I think perhaps the blink patterns for English were slightly different to a French speaker because the pauses and the intonation do correspond to facial movements, and I think that's why that looks slightly odd in that case. But there is a big caveat. These programs are just getting smarter, so the head, the still head, the odd mouth shape, and the subtle sync issues might be red flags here, but if we were to do it again, would they be so evident? I don't know. There's only one thing we can do, which is keep assessing this technology, keep looking for the latest examples, and try to keep learning. Now, a final learning point, which I really want to dwell on a bit, was the observation that awareness of the experiment really changed people's perceptions. So my colleagues in London knew I was working on this project because I kept disappearing off to the TV studio and banging on about deepfakes, but not all team members did. Some people not in the London newsroom had absolutely no idea that I was working on this project. The people who did know that we were doing a deepfake were able to identify those red flags really quickly. They spotted the audio sync, they spotted the mouth shape. Those who were completely in the dark felt was something wrong, but couldn't quite put their fingers on it. That may sound obvious, but it really is something that we can consider in our training. It's why our experiment, although it was unscientific, was a really valuable lesson. If you look at some of these responses, these are people who didn't know the deepfake was coming. So listening to your senses tells you there's something strange here. It seems like it still needs production. The sound doesn't quite match. Is this not her voice? And wow, you can't tell it at the first watch. So these people, these were genuine reactions from my team who didn't know the deepfake was coming. And I think that it shows that if you know a problem is coming, then you prepare to approach it with critical thinking. If you don't have that priming, then you're relying on instinct. And our instinct is a really powerful thing, and we should trust it. We always do. But it shows that we can respond more effectively if we've confronted the issue in advance. So I think that was the rationale for this whole experiment. So with that in mind, we created what we call a sliding scale of deceit. Something we've been building to map this territory and to prepare and train our teams so that they better understand the issues that may arise in this area. We can use this scale to plot real-life examples, which are a really good way for our journalists to learn, and now we've got a deepfake example, we can plot that too. It looks at the different ways that video is manipulated. At one end of the scale is zero manipulation, but that definitely doesn't mean that videos that haven't been manipulated can't deceive. So this is a tweet. On the left-hand side, it says, please pray for the people of Sierra Leone. Over 300 people confirmed dead and 100 still missing. Hashtag Africa, hashtag Sierra Leone, mudslide. It was accompanied by a very dramatic video of a building falling into a swollen river. At the time of the Sierra Leone disaster, which was summer 2017, we were asked to check this video by a client who'd seen it. And actually, just last week, and the second tweet there, that's the same video turned up with hashtag Iran after the devastating flooding in Iran. Now, we thought this looked a bit familiar, so we ran some keyframe checks through reverse search, and we were right. We'd seen this exact same scene before in Tibet a few months earlier.
Heavy downpours have hit Jiangda County in China's Tibet Autonomous Region. Water levels have exceeded the banks in some rivers. One residential building on the edge of a river collapsed. It's still unknown whether there are people trapped inside. Authorities are taking precautions in the face of continuing rain. Many residents have been evacuated to safety.
So this type of mislabeling, where the original video is taken out of context, is actually the most common type of video fake news that we encounter. So we're not supposed to use the term fake news, but it's a good way of just kind of looping together some of these misleading areas at the moment. And I think we should just bear that in mind. We might be thinking about synthetic video as a major threat, but the big threat we're facing every single day is simply video that is recycled and stripped of context. And as I said, this very same video resurfaced this week, connected with Iran. It's something our team sees on a daily basis. So this is by far the most common way that video can mislead us. On to the next point on the scale, which is edited video, which is still relatively frequent. I'm going to show you a clip that circulated a few years ago purporting to show pro-Russian forces downing a Ukrainian military helicopter. Please be warned that this clip and the one that follows, they're not graphic, but they are dramatic in nature. So this was circulating around the time of the conflict in Ukraine, but actually, we thought we'd seen it before, and we had. It was a clip from Syria the year before, in which Free Syrian Army rebels celebrated taking down a pro-regime helicopter over Aleppo, and this was the original.
الله أكبر كتب دفاع الجوي التابع للمجلس العسكري الثوري في محافظة حلب تسقط طائرة بالروحية في محيط مطار من نقل عسكري الله أكبر.
So as you can see here, the logo had been removed. Large sections like the fighter had gone, and really importantly, the audio had been replaced. All the Arabic stripped out and replaced with just the gunshots on a loop. So going back to my point about real-life examples, this is the kind of stuff that journalists remember. They remember that time where they saw that Ukrainian video that was actually Syria, and that was why the deepfake experiment was so important for us. Now, another type of video that we need to consider is staged video. I don't know if you remember a famous example from 2014. There was a viral clip of a young boy rescuing a girl from gunfire in Syria. It turned out to be the work of a Norwegian filmmaker who wanted to see how the media might react. We don't see this a great deal, but I'm going to show you something far more lighthearted that we encountered last year. It's the moment Croatian firefighters received a call out just at the point their national soccer team was about to beat Russia on penalties in the World Cup. Or is it? Keep watching this guy. I thought it was a really great video. It's such a fun watch, and actually it was an inspired fire safety awareness campaign from the local Zagreb fire station. So we spoke to them. They acted out this scenario after something similar had happened the week before, and they had this great idea to post it online with a fire safety message asking people don't celebrate with pyrotechnics. The degree of video manipulation that we sometimes see is CGI. Now, CGI is the basis of deepfakes, computer-generated imagery, but normally CGI is not underpinned by that AI. The AI bit was the new part for deepfakes. Have a look at this video I'm about to play. It shows a fly past over London just as the city was going crazy for the England team's crunch match. To put it in context, some sort of mild hysteria was happening in the UK at this time. We were all like dreaming this might be the moment that we actually win the World Cup or even get to the final. So that kind of, that hysteria was bubbling along. And it's a really amusing piece of CGI that is actually obvious to most people on first watch. It was created with no malice at all by the production company behind it. Again, they were just having a bit of fun and enjoying the mood of the nation. However, we saw this video presented as if it were true by mainstream media, with headlines that had no reflection of the fact that it was entirely CGI-created work. Now, they might argue that our audience knows that, they knew that, they could tell. But my assessment of tweets is certainly that was not the case. Loads of people were going, did this really happen? And there had been an RAF flypast the previous day celebrating 100 years of the RAF, and they'd spelled out 100 in the sky. So actually, you know, it was quite a clever piece of CGI. And I think it goes to show that we need to really label stuff really carefully. We might be doing it with a nudge and a wink and, hey, look at this. But we have got a responsibility as media to make sure that we are really clear with content like this. It doesn't mean we can't use it, but we should say that it's been manipulated. And at the very end of the scale is where we can slot the deepfake. Because to create a video of this nature requires a high degree of manipulation, a high degree of preparation. I hope that our journalists have these distinct possibilities in mind whenever they approach and analyse third-party content. Having looked at the categorisation of video fakes, I'll now run through some of the techniques that we use to verify this material. I could do an entire presentation on this alone. I won't, so I want some time for questions. But in a nutshell, these techniques are reverse image search. Now, we can't reverse video by itself. There's no program that does that for us. But what we can do is reverse search video frames. Now, I talked a bit on Thursday about this. There's this great tool called Invid. If you plug the video in, creates a series of keyframes for you, and you can reverse search those. And you can use lots of different techniques for lots of different programs for reverse searching, which may give you different results. That's a really key part of the video verification process. It's excellent for debunking content. It's not so good for authenticating content. Geolocation checks are really important. We use the satellite imagery and Google Earth, Google Street View. Again, it's usually an important source of open source information, and it helps us establish exactly where a piece of video was actually filmed, if we can cross-reference against that. Metadata examination is an excellent way of adding to the evidence for verification. Now, you probably know that metadata can be hacked quite easily, which might make you think, well, why do we even bother examining it? Because someone can just change it. Again, it's all about adding to the body of evidence. And particularly if you receive a piece of content fairly soon after an incident's happened, you have to consider, has that person really had time to alter the metadata and get it over to me? And have they got the expertise to do that? So it's just another key, another part of that evidence that we can look at. Probably the most important for me is finding corroborating imagery. If we don't have any corroborating imagery for something we can see, I have to ask myself why wasn't there another piece of imagery showing this? Why did no one else have their phone or camera out? Sometimes there's a good reason. Sometimes they're really remote. Sometimes there simply is, but we haven't seen it yet. And actually, we've got lots of good ways of looking for corroborating imagery. Obviously, deep searches of social for news events are very important. But also, we've got the gigantic Reuters archive, which can be very useful because often news events happen in places where we've been before, and we're able to check that some of the same things are present. So corroborating imagery is hugely important. And directly questioning the source. Virtually every single piece of third-party content that we put on the Reuters wire has been fully rights cleared with the copyright holder, i.e. the source. There's only a very few exceptions. As soon as we can get through to the source, we ask lots of standard journalistic questions: who, what, why, when, how, and we want to see consistent answers and a level of detail in those answers. We can also ask them to help prove that they were there. We've had people sending us pictures of the tickets for aeroplanes. We've had people sending us the full files so we can check metadata. We've had people sending us the camera roll of their phone so we can see other pictures that they took on the same day. Again, it all helps them prove that they were there. And actually, it's often in their interest to help us prove that they were there, because very often they want to be taken seriously and they want to make sure that their video is used in authentic news reporting. The other thing we've got at Reuters is a real wealth of subject area expertise and language expertise. We've got 2,500 journalists worldwide, and we're able to speak to them about pieces of content that are troubling us. Can they see any clues? Can they identify any dialect issues? Or is there anything else that they can spot which makes them a little uneasy? That's a really important part of authenticating video. So I've had a lot of people question when it comes to deepfakes, can't tech just solve this for you? Can we not have a black box where you shove the video in and it comes out and it tells you whether it's fake or not? I really wish that were true. It would make my life a lot easier. But that does not exist yet. There are lots of efforts to explore this area. One of the fascinating potential solutions is the Face Forensics Database project. I don't know if you've heard about this. It uses AI analysis of a lot of doctored and undoctored images to try to learn the differences between the two, so they can create rules that would detect forgeries. But then that's limited to faces, and we probably have to recreate this for lots of other areas of fakery. We know that technology companies have got a range of projects and teams dedicated to looking into this area, and we're actively exploring some of those possibilities alongside them. And we're also seeing increasingly industry collaboration and cross-learning, and I think that's really got to continue in this area. I hope that our experiment plays a tiny little part in that. We're certainly trying to listen very carefully to the other experiments that have happened in newsrooms and the other steps people are taking. But certainly in the end, the conclusion was that technology in itself cannot be the solution to this issue. Deepfakes are a threat, but they're really just the next iteration of the wider threat of visual mis and disinformation that we're encountering on a daily basis, and that's easily spread through modern social networks. We're at the forefront of dealing with this, but ultimately it's going to be down to all of us as citizens to make sure that we understand the picture and the technology. The deepfake technology is clearly only going to get better, and it could be a matter of time before some of it's available on people's phones, which leads to all sorts of potential consequences. So our key conclusion at the end of all this was that, in the near term at least, a combination of human judgment, subject specialism, and frameworks to train and verify and prepare are actually more important at the moment than the current technological solutions. It was never intended to be a scientific experiment, this little video that we created. We just tried to understand this area as best we could. We need to make sure we prepare and arm our teams with as much information as possible. So we started to build a newsroom culture that has a greater level of instinctive questioning and a greater understanding of the threats that we might face. And that's all. So hopefully we've got plenty of time for questions. And I hope you've got some, because I need to stop talking for a bit. Anyone? No questions? Okay. Oh, one question. Okay.
The other side. The other side.
Journalist at Euronews. I was just wondering your thoughts on who are actually going to produce these, because I myself at one time tried to create a deepfake after having read about this and was floored by how difficult it is. It's really difficult to make a good, convincing deepfake, and I mean, you had a crack team on this for a long time, I assume, and didn't even manage to make a successful one. So for me, it seems like you need to have a lot of resources to be able to do it. Might probably be foreign state actors, but I'm just wondering, how do you see the threat picture?
Yeah, well, foreign state actors is definitely something that we need to bear in mind. Certainly for the native dubbing of this nature, I think you do need that expertise. But I don't know if you saw that new Adobe feature where you can take objects out of video. I mean, that's a kind of scarily accessible level of video manipulation. Beyond that, we've seen the communities of interest on Reddit, and that's generated whole YouTube channels. But they're kind of quite specialist at the moment. I guess it's a matter of time before, if the desire is there, that this kind of technology can really be incorporated into more mainstream editing programs. And some of those steps that it takes to create one are just made easier, made faster. I mean, we've seen the filters on Snapchat. I wouldn't have thought even 5 years ago that I'd be able to add bunny ears and, you know, crazy face filters to videos like that easily, but you can. So I really think it's a matter of time before some of those steps that make it a difficult process are far easier.
Yeah, I just to put it in context. I'm a documentary editor and also done comedies, and I've done some of the sort of deep fake stuff purely for TV comedy laughs, and we got neither laughs nor it wasn't that convincing. But my overall question is really, you call deep fake a threat. What sort of threat is it exactly? Who is it Who is being threatened, and what is being threatened?
From a news industry perspective?
Well, I suppose overall, really, but perhaps both from a consumer and a professional point of view.
Well, the consumer perspective, I've certainly seen there are efforts. We had a press release just a few weeks ago from someone a company who's been set up to try and stand up for offering services to victims who've had deepfakes made of themselves. So revenge porn is an obvious area that could really have an impact, and quite a serious one at the individual level. For the news level, well, we've thought about some possibilities that could arise, but I think maybe there are some areas where media literacy is not as high and video is shared on closed networks and there isn't a possibility to question in the same way. All it takes is for an official to say something different to what was actually said, you know, a policy change, a kind of a reaction to an incident. We've talked about the possibility of police spaces being, statements being doctored, talking about, you know, curfews and riots and stuff. That could actually influence people's behaviour and it could, you know, cause terrifying.
I suppose it's a sort of an exclusive though, isn't it? It represents, the thing about journalism, I'm not a journalist, I don't understand the industry, but it seems that deepfake represents the old-fashioned scoop. It's one thing that changes everything. And to me, I don't sense that threat because any sort of critical person would look at that and say, well, that's one thing in a million. I need much more evidence. And do you see that as an issue? Yeah, so absolutely. I think the first deepfakes that really cause a news impact probably will be picked up by newsrooms and identified as such. But if you imagine places where they communities don't have access to maybe mainstream news in the same way, and it's being shared on closed networks, a deepfake video, it could have an impact because the understanding of how to verify this material and what else they could look for is not necessarily there. You only have to think of the cases in India with the WhatsApp lynchings. Those were fake news that was spread through WhatsApp and really did have an impact on those communities. And I think this could spread in the same way initially. But in the long run, these videos could be so well done that, yeah, we have to look for corroborating video all the time. But there isn't always corroborating video. There isn't always another camera in the room. And we have to have a way of assessing whether that piece of content is authentic.
Hi, I'm Marisna Paukri from text analytics company Utopia. As I know quite a lot of AI, I want to just calm down the scares of being able to do whatever automatically. It won't happen in the next 20 years at least.
Oh, really?
Yes. So I think in this case, the volume is the scary thing. If there are huge amount of those fake things, which you can't right away say what is bad and what is good. But if you have just few, once a year, once a month, you can do it manually and find out whether it is correct or not.
What, for your mind, what's slowing down the fast development of programs like this?
As he said, it is very, very, very difficult to do something very natural with artificial intelligence. And that is that we humans are so much better in those things than the machines. Okay,
so the team that made this for us did it in an afternoon. Is that because, as you'd say, they already have so much data in their system that, that all that base of knowledge is there that's difficult for someone else to replicate?
Yeah, but they had told you that you need to have the blue background and you need to have this and that. They are able to do one kind of thing, and still you were able to recognize it.
Yeah.
So don't scare about anything much worse in the
Thank you, we can all sleep easier. Good to know. Any more questions? If not, then I suggest everyone has a break before Sam Gregory returns to talk about what more we can do to prepare in this area and some of the other interesting aspects of research and how it's come together. So thanks very much for coming.